My name is Andrew Stewart, and I am a member of the Rhode Island Media Cooperative. 2016 has proven to be one of the most eventful years in recent memory. One element that is particularly taking up a substantial level of interest is the issue of minority rights. In a year where groups like Black Lives Matter have been making headlines on a weekly basis, it seems that a great level of political activity and attention is being paid Black and brown people and their votes during this election. In order to better understand this group, I have spent the past year talking with voters across America, asking them about both the election and what they hope to hear talked about the day after they cast their ballot. We now present to you the results of those conversations. Today, we will hear from two writers with the radio magazine and website Black Agenda Report. Both these interviews were recorded prior to the Democratic Party's national convention in July. Glen Ford is the executive editor of Black Agenda Report.
I see the potential for a collapse of U.S. imperialism in my lifetime. The worldwide struggle against capitalism will be a more complex and drawn-out struggle.
Do you think this electoral season is symptomatic of that imperialist collapse?
I think what we're seeing here is a collapse of the consensus politics in this country, in the United States, embodied in the duopoly. That is, because of the crisis of capitalism, which has eroded the living standards of workers of all races over the past 30 years and has brought to a halt and reversed whatever progress Black folks have experienced since the 60s. We have a situation in which the contract or the compact that especially white workers felt that they had with the rulers clearly has been, in the eyes of white workers, betrayed. And that is the source of the revolt among the Trump folks in the Republican Party. On the Democratic side, it is quite clear that capitalism is the boogeyman who is responsible for the decline in living standards among folks in the United States. And so we see that socialism is now no longer a dirty word, because capitalism has become, in large measure, delegitimized. The legitimacy of a mild, nominal socialist like Bernie Sanders is actually a reflection of the illegitimacy in the mind, in the eyes of much of the population, of the system of capitalism. And so the global capitalist crisis, the chickens are coming home to roost, not whole flocks of them darkening the sky, but lots of chickens coming home to roost in this electoral season.
Can you talk briefly about what you called Trump's damn near anti-imperialism?
Yeah, Trump really is an America firster. I don't know if he is instinctively that or if he read up on it. I kind of expect that he's instinctively that, and he may have skimmed a little bit of history. But his position is essentially anti-imperialist. He removes all of the underlying assumptions that undergird the U.S. Military empire in the world. He has reduced the U.S. imperial tentacles that have created 1,000 military bases and that now dot most countries of the world, not to an American mission to preserve world order and to be a shining example to the world, but to a simple financial transaction. He says if they want U.S. protection, then they're going to have to pay for it. That just pulls the whole rug out of from under the rationale for NATO, the rationale for these far-flung U.S. Military bases. And what has been fascinating about this is that here we have what most of people consider to be the right wing of the right wing. That is, the right wing of the Republican Party, certainly in terms of its constituents. Trump has attracted the virulent white nationalist component of that Republican Party, which is usually considered to be thought to be the right wing of the Republican Party. And yet that right wing of the Republican Party did not bat an eye and did not budge an inch in its support for Trump when he basically said, to hell with the U.S. military empire, America first. If the War Party constituency is not in the right wing of the Republican Party, then where is it? It calls into question whether there is really a mass constituency for U.S. imperial policy of since World War II, or whether, in fact, the population has just gone along with it as part of the consensus package. Well, that consensus, since the rulers have not delivered on the economic side of the bargain or the perceived bargain, that consensus has collapsed. And we see that even Trump's folks don't really give a damn about the War Party and its agenda, much less, of course, free so-called trade, which they see as being the main source of their economic insecurity and their pauperization.
So, do you think that the Bernie or bust group movement, quasi-movement, they could become Green Party members?
The Green Party is not at this stage even large enough to accommodate the numbers of disenchanted Sandernistas that should be flocking to the Green Party at the point when the Bernie campaign definitively collapses. We're talking about millions of people, but the Green Party is quite small. It would be a tsunami as far as the green infrastructure is concerned, because there's not much of it. But I think we need to really talk about what would happen after the collapse of Bernie's candidacy, which could come any day now, although I think and hope that it does not happen until the convention in Philadelphia. If we think in terms of a party somehow just almost spontaneously generating itself with enough members and an infrastructure that is capable of fielding or producing enough voters to actually play a major role almost instantaneously or in 2018, I think that's not going to happen. That's thinking in conventional electoral terms, and that's kind of magical thinking. But there will be tens of thousands of folks who are activists or have become activists or want to become activists, who will emerge from this Bernie Sanders experience with the word socialist on their mind, with a desire to create a political formation that reflects their social democratic kind of politics. And social democratic would mean anything to the left of the DLC wing of the Democratic Party, which is Hillary and her husband and Barack Obama and almost all the leadership of the Democratic Party. Anything to the left of them to Marxists. It's a huge political space. It's a huge chunk of the political spectrum that has just lain fallow all these decades because the Democratic Party has sat on it. And so there will be pushes and pulls within that big spectrum between folks like Socialist Alternative, which considers itself to be a Marxist party and is calling for that party of 99%, and folks who are really just like Bernie Sanders, only they're not wedded to the Democratic Party. They are mildly social democratic. That's a whole lot of territory, and so these ideological kinds of struggles will be fought out by groups of activists numbering in the tens of thousands, not the millions. But once they have created their formations and gone after and targeted the folks that they want to organize, then we'll see a real growth of mass organizing, but that'll take a year or two before we see formations that we can really point to and say that looks like that's the kernel of the new party. And the Green Party will be part of that whole process. I was simply answering your question by trying to say that the Green Party will not be the epicenter of this. It will be a center of this new battleground for allegiances. The U.S. has never had a social democratic party, so it's going to stumble its way through there.
So in your most recent column, you write, columnist Thomas L. Friedman senses the stench of death in a piece titled "Dump the GOP for a Grand New Party." What he seems to be describing as break with Trump, the Tea Party, the gun lobby, and the climate change deniers, and instead fight for quote-unquote free trade and a foreign policy that will, quote, manage weak and collapsing nations, is in fact the Libertarian Party's middle and left wings. This portion of the party is essentially functioning as the European liberal parties do. The Libertarians are currently working with the Greens on some issues, including lawsuits against the duopoly debate system. What do you think about this serving as perhaps the augury of a wider united front from below involving Greens, who are obviously social democratic in some regards, and these actual liberals?
Well, I think that Greens and liberals can get along in that social democratic space. If we're talking about the huge number of black folks who are actually resemble Swedish social democrats more than any other than anything else, any working alliance with those white elements who are inherently racist is impossible. But I do expect that white folks can get together and agree to disagree on some issues and to agree on others. But that's not going to be possible with the black cohort, which will emerge once the duopoly it has been weakened. That will be so central to this social democratic kind of undertaking. Blacks make up 25% of the Democratic Party right now. By rights, if there were a party to the left of the Democrats, blacks should make up something close to half of it. But it will not be possible to have large black participation in a social democratic party that includes the kinds of libertarians, for example, who are unenlightened on race.
Certainly true. The corollary of this situation, much was like the case in the Weimar Germany, could be the development of another world war, which Obama seems very intent on. Could a war end up smothering this populist insurgency and reassert duopoly hegemony?
Well, wars do seem to have that tendency, but today's wars are not like World War II and World War I or Vietnam or Korea. The United States does not have a draft. The United States has an all-volunteer military whose white troops are drawn from Nowheresville, Minnesota, and ain't never heard about it, Idaho, and places like that. The Pentagon and Wall Street realizes that it has to politically contain its war machine that is in the home country, or risk that it become a radicalizing force among the population. That's the reason for the all-volunteer military, and that's the reason that Barack Obama was put in power or selected to be the new face of imperialism, because that's the reason that he talked about Bush's wars being dumb wars. The dumb part was committing lots of American troops and risking American casualties and causing a radicalization and demonstrations that cumulatively involved millions and millions of people right here in the home country. And so their wars nowadays are wars that are insulated, that the experience of the American people are insulated from.
It would seem that the Greens and other left parties that we have talked about might make real gains, but that the various gerrymandering laws hinder ballot access in all 50 states. But this does not mean a midterm upset, a sort of left version of what the Tea Party did in 2010 to President Obama, would be impossible. However, this would also mean that we would have to be on guard for opportunist elements. What are some basic elements and principles that such a coalition should put into practice?
Well, one thing that the Bernie Sanders experience has shown is that you can raise tens of millions of dollars in small contributions, starting from a base of near nothing. Now, of course, Barack Obama raised some monies in small contributions, actually at about the same rate as George Bush did in 2004. But the Bernie campaign raised all of its money, excuse me, in small contributions. And his troops are aware of that. This has never been done before in a kind of insurgent campaign. And what it has shown, and I'm sure that this lesson has been learned by them, is that if you can get enough people together, you can actually raise millions of dollars and go toe to toe, at least in terms of some aspects of electioneering, with the corporate folks. Now, the Green Party has not been able to muster the kind of monies that are necessary, first of all, to get on ballots. They're really, really strapped for cash. But that's because the Green Party is small and struggles to just maintain itself intact. I believe that the tens of thousands of activists who have tasted something that they thought was possible victory and have seen the raising of tens of thousands of dollars outside of corporate circles are going to be financially solvent enough to actually solve these getting on the ballot problems. They're not that expensive. Even in states like North Carolina, where you have to sign up maybe 80,000 or something like that voters for on a petition, is not really that difficult for an organization that has a couple of $1 million to spend. I don't think it's going to be a great obstacle.
So this question is a little longer in introduction. The recent events in South America have been quite instructive of how guarded the American Empire is, while also interestingly showing the true colors of Pope Francis. He was quite cool towards Macri when the new Argentine president went to the Vatican. Michel Temer in Brazil was dependent on evangelical Christian support. We're also seeing the Vatican beginning to host European social democratic and Marxist thinkers in efforts to build alliances in the face of austerity. You've been participating this year in several conferences at Temple and at the Left Forum that involve discussion of religion in the left. What are your thoughts on how this potential new left party, or perhaps a united front from below, should incorporate people of faith, particularly given how antagonistic things can sometimes become in this regard?
Well, we have had an experience with liberation theology, which was an important companion piece with other forms of struggle from below in Latin America, and it was important enough for the Vatican to basically crush it, to purge the Catholic apparatus worldwide of liberation theologians. The present Pope, although more closeted when he was a priest, was clearly sympathetic to those priest comrades who experienced the sharp end of that purge. Brazil is extremely interesting because it has a huge fundamentalist Christian population, and especially within the half of Brazil that is black. And in fact, the extreme penetration of Christian fundamentalism among black Brazilians, I believe, is a great factor in the political neutering of that population. That is, they do not participate proportionately in the MST and other left organizations in Brazil, certainly not in proportion to the misery that afflicts black folks in Brazil and the extreme mortality from probably the most lethal police force in the world. But these fundamentalist preacher influences have really paralyzed politics in black Brazil. And if black Brazil does not revolt, it's difficult for Brazil to go through a real social transformation.
Right. Specifically in America, how should leftists, both of color and white, there's a lot of hostility sometimes towards especially the Catholic Church due to its stances on homosexuality and abortion. Do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I have thoughts on the Christian Church in Black America, and which had its own liberation theology, not directly related to the Catholic version, but rooted in black resistance over many generations. And although the mythology popularized also by the corporate media is that the black church was all in terms of the civil rights struggles of the 60s, that's really not true. Dr. Martin Luther King and his Southern Christian Leadership Conference represented a kind of renegade faction of the black Baptist preacher community. The Martin Luther King's itinerary, his schedule of visitations to cities, his campaigns were actually dictated not by where the conditions were best to launch a liberation project, but was limited to those cities in which at least one other preacher would give him an invitation. You know, the protocol in Black Baptist circles is you don't go to town unless you have an invitation from at least one congregation. And in most cities, not one other preacher would invite the SCLC in. And that's why we saw Dr. King going to out-of-the-way places like St. Augustine, Florida, and Albany, Georgia, because those were some of the few cities in which at least one member of the clergy opened his or her doors to the movement. In all those other cities, Columbus, Georgia, and Savannah, Georgia, and Macon, Georgia, no doors opened for Dr. King. So there is a myth of a liberation theology that was at the core of the Black church and was a bulwark of the civil rights movement, but it is just that, a myth.
Do you have any other thoughts in closing about this election or the political landscape in general?
I believe that Black folks will be the last group, the last component of the Democratic base to leave the the party in substantial numbers. Now, we do see that about half of Black folks 35 and below supported Bernie Sanders. And that's quite significant, although that's not a level of support among that age group that comes close to white support for Bernie Sanders. It is significant because the Black community exists under the hegemony of the Democratic Party. That not only is almost all of Black elected officials Democrats, but all of the Black civic organizations like the NAACP and the Urban League and such are annexes of the Democratic Party, and even the Black sororities and fraternities act as extensions of the Democratic Party. So the word hegemony really does apply, and if in the space of less than a year we find that half of younger Blacks below the age of 35 are willing to join an insurgency against the Democrats, that's quite significant. But the older Black folks are going to be frozen in fear of what might happen to the Democratic Party, which they believe is the only thing that stands between them and the white man's party, the Republican Party. That's what keeps Black folks in the Democratic Party and in lockstep with a party that is to the right, significantly to the right of the Black political spectrum. It is fear, and only when the Republicans or whatever manifestation of the white man's party comes to pass, that party is in flux, of course. Only when these older Black folks are no longer intimidated and see the Republican Party as an existential threat to Black life, will they dare to move out of what they believe to be is the protective corral of the Democrats. But we will see lots of younger Black folks not only moving towards these social democratic formations that will be created, but also into independent Black political activity. We have not had much independent Black political activity in decades because of the hegemony of the Democratic Party in Black America. Once that hegemony cracks, then we'll see a lot more independent Black politics, and it will be left and militant.
Certainly. One other thought, discussion point has come to me, and I apologize. Recently, columnist Chris Hedges, I have a lot of problems with his writings, but still, he did say in a recent column that if Clinton were to win, that resentment from Trump supporters could result in the development of a kind of backlash that might be much more violent than what is seen before. And the converse of that discussion is, should Trump win the election, which seems very probable given the amount of voters that are turning out for Trump in opposition to the Democratic Party at all. We could see a huge resentment and backlash against the election of Clinton. What are your thoughts on this sort of potential for the militia and extremely militantly racist, white supremacist culture gaining something out of November, whichever way the election goes?
There are some very volatile and violent folks in white America, and I could see them becoming inflamed. But I do not agree with those who see Trump himself and the bulk of his followers as somehow a vanguard of fascism in the United States. The fascist threat in the U.S. wears blue. It doesn't wear brown. I think that people are working on European models that not only don't fit, but they actually divert people's attention from the real beast. And the real beast is the national security state itself and its creation, the mass black incarceration state, and all the methods of social control that these folks who make this critique fear and associate with fascism are actually in place. They are first tested on and then applied in the black community and later put to more general use. If fascism is on the way, it comes from the Republican and Democratic parties. We get terrorism from the more volatile racist elements of white America, but fascism is something quite different.
Margaret Kimberley is an editor and senior columnist with Black Agenda Report. Her internationally syndicated Freedom Writer column is featured on websites and newspapers worldwide. The first question I have is if we could develop a working definition of what you folks at Black Agenda Report call the Black Misleadership class.
Mm-hmm. Well, the Black Misleadership class are the people who are generally thought of as leaders, but who in our case, for a variety of reasons, have led black people astray into a dismal situation. It means elected officials, the Congressional Black Caucus, and other elected officials around the country. It means the leaders of so-called civil rights organizations who are dependent on corporate contributions. Some people selected by the media as spokespersons, whether they actually help in raising issues and leading us in the right direction or not. So these are the people who make up the black misleaders, and they are dependent on other people, politicians in particular. Once big money interests started targeting black politicians where they targeted everyone else, they ceased to be the Congressional Black Caucus, ceased to be the conscience of the Congress, and is now like everybody else.
What would you say is your general critique of Barack Obama and how he has led the country over the past 8 years, in particular with regards to how he has handled issues dealing with black and brown people?
Well, I used to say before he was elected, there was always this perennial debate, discussion among black people about whether or not we would ever see a black president. And I had concluded that we should not want a black president because what that person would have to do to get the job would mean that individual would, by necessity, not address the needs of black people. And I think I've been proven exactly right. We also have two conservative parties running this country. The Republicans are far right and the Democrats are center right. So no one gets a president who serves the interests of working people, who addresses the systemic injustices directed at black people. You're not going to get that out of the Democrats or the Republicans. Even worse with Obama, because he is black, black people love him regardless. It doesn't matter what he does, or doesn't do, what he says about us. And the things he says about us as a group are invariably very negative. I think this is partly political cynicism on his part, and partly, I believe, beliefs of his own, quite frankly. Because let's not forget that he is does not have the experiences that black people have. His father was an immigrant. He has no connection with the history of black people in this country, and I think partly that's I'm maybe perhaps playing amateur psychologist, but I think I'm proven right by his actions over the years. So this is what we've gotten with this guy. He comes from a conservative party, and the Democrats make sure nobody gets the nomination unless they go through this, I call it the casting couch, among rich people in the country to get buy-in from them. So we never get anybody who is going to work for our interests. And having a man who no one makes demands of, black people respond to the racism that is directed against him. And I have seen it happen. People start to ask a question, start to make a demand, and then some, cracker congressman from Nowheresville, we'll call him Tar Baby or something, and right away they turn around and start to defend him. So that's what we're stuck with this guy.
Your latest column took on the Sanders campaign and said that they could bring down the Democratic Party. Could you expand on that a little more?
Well, yeah, first of all, the Democratic Party needs to disappear. And over time, it's been over 100 years since either any of these changes have happened, but we didn't always have Democrats and Republicans in this country. So parties have come and they have gone, and it's time for the Democratic Party to go, because as we call it, the duopoly of the Republicans and the Democrats, they play this tag team, and there's this pretense. So, for example, Republicans will say they hate people on welfare, but it was a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, who actually got rid of welfare. Welfare was an entitlement for 60 years. People had the right to get public assistance in all 50 states, and that ended under a Democrat. So that is the sort of thing that I mean. And when the first 2 years of Obama's term, the Democrats ran everything, controlled both houses of Congress, controlled the White House, so they could have, for example, raised the minimum wage to anything they wanted to raise it. But in 2009, they raised the minimum wage 70 cents. So now they talk about raising it $15 an hour, but that's because that demand came from the masses, and also because Republicans run Congress now, so there's no chance of it getting done anyway. So it's time to just stop fearing being a spoiler, not fear Republican presidents more than we fear Democratic presidents. We need a new political party that works for the interests of working people and that will address the various inequalities created by racism. And the Democratic Party is not it. It can't be reformed. They don't want to reform. They're the way they are because they want to be that way. They want to be controlled by wealthy people. they want to appeal to the right wing, as Hillary Clinton has already started doing. They have to go. And Sanders supporters have the ability, by withholding support of Hillary Clinton, who I believe will get the nomination, they have the ability to help get rid of the Democrats, and that would be a wonderful thing.
So one event that I think shows a beginning of this fracturing was the defeat of the TPP.
Fast track.
Which was a very big strike against Obama. And I wonder what you think about both that fracturing beginning to show in public, but also the ability of Sanders supporters to go for the Green Party after the Sanders fades out, becomes the guy who is going to be endorsing Hillary Clinton.
Well, people keep talking about Sanders being supported by the Greens, and he hasn't said anything about wanting to do that. He said all along that he would endorse the nominee if he didn't get the nomination. So he hasn't shown any inclination of to switch parties. He said he wouldn't run as a third-party candidate. So I don't know. I think that's more wishful thinking than anything. So I don't see that as being a possibility. So I don't see that as being very likely to happen. I think the question is Sanders supporters realizing what they should be, in my opinion, what they should be doing. I think, unfortunately, people like Sanders, or the left-ish Democrats, when people support them, they're hoping for a better Democrat. And I believe we're not going to get a better Democrat in the White House. What they should be striving for is a major systemic change. And so I'm not sure that Sanders supporters are really ready to do what I think what history is calling them to do. So they want Bernie to run as a Green. He's not a Green, he's a Democrat. Mm-hmm. And he's, by the way, he's not, he's not, for example, opposed to imperialism. He said that we, need to, vis-a-vis Russia, for example, we have to contain Putin, which is nonsense. He says he believes the kill list, where the president decides that certain people can be assassinated. He says he's not opposed to that. He's not opposed to drone strikes. So he's still a Zionist, and he says, for example, Israel's attacks on Gaza were disproportionate, not that Israel has no right to run Gaza as an open-air prison. So he's not even that left-wing to begin with. And the Green Party, for example, as part of their platform, says there should be no U.S. military installations outside of the U.S. Now, is that something Bernie Sanders is ready to sign on to? And as someone who plans to vote Green, I don't want the Green Party to water down their platform to suit Bernie Sanders supporters. The Greens are who they are. So, and that also shows that, even people who claim to be Greens weren't really. They were still hoping for a Democrat. There were people here in New York who had registered as Green Party members who switched back to Democrats so they could vote for Bernie Sanders in the primary. And I was very disappointed, but actually I should not have been surprised. That means these people weren't really Greens. They weren't really left. People hope that they'll get change they want by supporting the status quo, when that's not going to happen.
Right. So do you think there are any other tactical steps that need to be taken to preserve the Green platform and make sure that it maintains fidelity to its roots while presenting a face that can appeal to Sanders supporters after he burns out? Because my own feeling is where Sanders ends, the Greens could really begin.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is an opportunity for the Greens to promote themselves and make themselves known to a wider audience. The corporate media work hand in hand with the Democrats and Republicans to make sure that people don't hear about any other parties. We're always told that RT, which used to be called Russia Today, was, this horrible propaganda arm of the Russians. But they actually had a debate among the Green Party presidential candidates. And I thought, well, why is this only on RT? Why do you have to be online and a viewer of RT to know that the Green Party exists and they're trying to choose their presidential candidate? So I think it would be great if the Green Party could become more well-known, but the problem, I think, is still that people aren't ready to even stick their toe in the water and acknowledge that the Democratic Party has got to go altogether. So as long as if the Greens depend on people who will change their party affiliation in hopes of getting some, sort of liberal Democrat, I don't know if those people can frankly be counted on for the kind of change we want to see.
That makes a lot of sense. Any other points you'd like to make?
No, that's it. But I wasn't sure what you meant about the TPP defeat.
There was a recent vote where a good number of Democrats went against Obama publicly. There was a news conference that featured Elizabeth Warren, Joseph Stiglitz, and a lot of people. And it showed, to my mind, a big fracturing going on and a rebuke of Obama's agenda.
I think it's important. The TPP is just for the President of the United States to get Congress to approve something that they can't even get a copy of. Mm-hmm. Members or their staff who wanted to see it, they had to go to a special office. They couldn't take a picture. They couldn't get copies of it. It just shows you, obviously, how criminal that enterprise is, and that's a Democratic president doing that. And I also want to say I am not, frankly, I don't want to see Donald Trump as the president, but I'm not in fear of a Trump presidency. I'm in fear of a Hillary Clinton presidency, frankly. People say they'll leave the country if Trump is elected. I say we should be packing our bags now, no matter who gets elected, because Hillary Clinton is a slicker version of Obama. Obama is as anybody who gets elected president under our current system, is a war-making president. But he will get jihadists to destroy Libya and call it democracy. Hillary Clinton will, laugh about getting Gaddafi killed. Obama's smart enough not to do that, but she's more upfront about it. And so I don't see what's wonderful about having her as president. And we've seen with Obama, other Democrats gave him free rein. And I'm sure that would happen with Hillary Clinton as well. So I'm not hopeful with her being the president either. Excuse me. And I think it's a mistake for Sanders supporters to suddenly decide that defeating Trump is the most important thing, because I don't believe that it is. And I know he's racist. As a black person, I know racism and the appeal to racism when I see it. But we don't get a better deal when we have Democrats in the White House. So I actually think that this drive to defeat Trump is strategically wrong-headed.
Thank you for listening today, and please tune in for other episodes of this series as they are released by the Rhode Island Media Cooperative. You can follow along through our Facebook page or on Twitter via @RI Media Co-op.